Does the ego have to be dissolved? No. To suggest that the ego has to be dissolved, for an ego to be dissolved, it must first exist. And if the ego exists, then infinite awareness cannot be infinite awareness, because you cannot have the finite and the infinite alongside each other. There is no room in the infinite for the finite. So to assert the existence of the ego is to deny the presence of awareness, or is to deny God's infinite being.
But the ego is created at an early age.
The ego is never created, it never exists, it is never destroyed or dissolved. There is only one... Joachim, don't listen to this. There is only one self, one I, one reality, which itself takes the shape of thinking, feeling, and perceiving. And in the activity of thinking, feeling, and perceiving, it seems to throw a veil over itself. It veils itself with its own activity, and as a result appears to itself to be something limited, just as the movie could be said to be the activity of the screen with which the screen seems, but never really, veils itself.
How is that different than when you were just having the conversation when you talked about the eye has to be disinfected?
It was a different answer to a different question. If somebody coming from Scotland asks how to get to the to Buckland Hall, Google says you go down the M6 and turn right. If someone's coming from Brighton, they say you go up the M23 and turn left. Two different instructions to the same place that seem to contradict each other, but are really the same instruction.
That's not very helpful.
Well, you see, my previous answer about disinfecting the ego was specifically for Joachim. This answer about does the ego need to be dissolved is specifically tailored to you.
Well, I guess I feel I have to dissolve my ego for me to fully shine.
That feeling itself is the ego. Right there,
I want that to dissolve.
Right there. That feeling, I want it to dissolve, is the illusory appearance of the ego. How could something that is not real dissolve?
I'd like to know the answer to that. Right. Tell me how to do that. Because it feels, it's like the crystal that has the cracks and the occlusions.
Imagine you're walking along let me borrow a well-known metaphor from the Vedantic tradition that you're all familiar with. You're walking along the lane here, and along the lane here at night. It's dark. And you see on the track in front of you what appears to be a snake. And as a result, you are afraid. How are you going to get rid of the snake? You think, in order to be free of my fear, I have to get rid of the snake. Now, what are you going to do to get rid of the snake?
Shoot it. I'm from America, so.
No.
I'm next to you and I wouldn't know this.
But you cannot shoot the snake. It's a stick. You mistook it for a snake. It's a stick.
Oh, a stick. It's not a snake.
No.
Oh.
Sorry, I was presuming that you were familiar with this metaphor. I'm sorry.
No, I have heard it.
So you're walking along. You see what appears to you to be a snake. I should have said. I presumed your knowledge. It appears as a snake, but it's really a stick. Okay. So now, what are you going to do to get rid of the snake?
Realize it's a stick.
And as a result, be relieved of your fear. Realize it's a stick. Okay. How are you going to realize it's a stick? What do you need to do? Do you need to dissolve the snake? Or get rid of the snake? No. You're quite right. You need to realize it's a stick. Now, what are you going to do to realize it's a stick, not a snake?
I just know it's a stick.
No, you don't. You think it's a snake. You're walking along, it's dark, you think it's a snake and you're afraid. So what are you going to do to change your belief it is a snake into your knowledge it is a stick? What are you going to do?
I don't know.
Well, if you don't do anything, your belief that it's a snake will remain. How are you going to find out what it is really?
Well, I could go closer to it.
Perfect. You go closer to it. Exactly. You go closer to it. What happens?
Well, I'll see that it's a stick, not a snake.
Perfect. Perfect. What you thought was a snake, because you hadn't seen it closely enough, turns out, when you look closely at it, it's a stick. And at that moment, your fear disappears. Now, the separate self is the snake. It cannot be dissolved because it's not really there. Why does it appear to be a separate self? And as a result, why is there a train of suffering in its wake? It's simply because we have not looked at it clearly. What do we have to do to know the reality of the separate self? Exactly the same thing that we had to do, relatively speaking, to know the reality of the apparent snake. We had to come close to it, go up to it, touch it. What is it really? And the seeing of the stick is the dissolution of the apparent snake. But there's no real dissolution. We didn't have to get rid of the snake because the snake never came into existence in the first place. It was never there. And therefore it cannot be destroyed, dissolved, or got rid of. All that is necessary is to see the reality of the stick. And that is why in this tradition we do not pay too much attention to our suffering. Yes, the teaching, in order to, because the teaching wants to reach everybody, the teaching will go to us, meet us in our suffering, and to a greater or lesser degree, depending on the person, will condone the existence of suffering. Will even dialogue with it to a certain extent. But we don't spend much time there. In other words, we don't spend much time with the snake. We go directly to see its reality. That takes care of the snake.
Can I interject something here? At that point, it feels to me like the path that I heard you, and kind of why I'm here, is the path where I can kind of withdraw from, let's say, mental loops that I find myself in. And I could withdraw and say, no, I'm not that. That's my mind. I am what knows that meant the mind. And that's been extremely useful for me. But the path then from here to the heart is the path of love, but the love is intertwined with pain. And so I feel both. And that's the tougher path. So the first path, the path of the head, is easy for me. The knowing that, but I guess in my mind, the dissolving of the being able to fully get to the path of the heart is intertwined with pain. So as I feel love, I also feel the pain. And it's tough to separate the two.
But it's not two different paths. They're the same. Ultimately, it's the same path, if I were to say to you, direct your attention now to that which you love the most. Sorry, direct your feeling. Go with your feeling to that you love the most. Where would you go?
Inside myself.
Yes, try to say more about it. I know it's not easy, but try to tell us more. If you can more, you try to find words that say more specifically to what it is you go to when you go to that which is most precious.
Well, I went to a thought of my children and...
No, a thought of your children is not the most precious thing in your life because you abandon it after about 3 seconds. I hope that your thoughts are not the most precious things to you because you discard them you trash them without thinking of it. Even now, the thought you were referring to of your children has vanished. It can't have been that precious. Go to that which is truly precious to you.
I find it difficult.
Perfect. Perfect. And now if I were to ask you, go to that which is aware of your experience. Tell us where your attention goes.
To the same place.
Perfect. The first path was the path of love. The second path was a path of knowledge. But if you explore them carefully, you took the same path in each case, and in each case you went to the same placeless place.
Yeah, it's true.
So I recommend that you travel on both paths equally, and that you switch back and forth between the two so that your heart is as much engaged in this exploration as your mind until they merge.